The name Adolf Hitler stands as perhaps the most reviled in human history, representing the catastrophic consequences of unchecked hatred, propaganda, and authoritarian power. His story is not one of admiration or sympathy, but a critical examination of how a failed artist became the architect of unprecedented destruction, responsible for World War II and the systematic murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, along with millions of other victims. Understanding Hitler's rise to power serves as a crucial warning about the fragility of democratic institutions and the devastating consequences when societies fail to recognize and resist the early signs of authoritarianism. This comprehensive analysis traces his transformation from an unremarkable Austrian youth to the dictator whose actions fundamentally reshaped the 20th century, leaving scars on humanity that persist today. We study this dark chapter not to dwell in horror, but to arm ourselves with knowledge. By understanding how Hitler exploited economic crisis, social divisions, and democratic weaknesses, we can better recognize similar threats in our own time and defend the values of human dignity, democracy, and peace that his regime sought to destroy. Early life and the making of hatred, 1889–1913. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian town near the German border. His early life was marked by conflict and instability that would shape his later authoritarian tendencies. His father, Alois Hitler, was a strict customs official with a violent temper who demanded absolute obedience from his family. Alois had changed his surname from Schicklgruber to Hitler in 1876. And his authoritarian parenting style created constant tension in the household. The relationship between Adolf and his father was particularly volatile. Alois wanted his son to follow a respectable career in the civil service, but Adolf harbored dreams of becoming an artist. These clashing ambitions led to frequent, intense confrontations that left lasting psychological scars on the young Hitler. His mother, Clara Pelzel, provided the only source of genuine affection in his childhood, supporting his artistic aspirations against his father's wishes. Adolf's academic performance reflected this domestic turmoil. Initially a decent student, his grades declined as family conflicts intensified. Teachers noted his intelligence but criticized his laziness and lack of discipline. When Alois died suddenly in 1903, rather than feeling liberated, 13-year-old Adolf seemed to lose direction entirely. His academic performance continued to deteriorate, and he eventually left school at age 16 without graduating. The death of his beloved mother, Clara, from breast cancer in December 1907, devastated Hitler. Dr. Eduard Bloch, the family physician, later described Hitler's grief as the most profound he had ever witnessed. This loss left Hitler emotionally shattered and increasingly isolated from normal human connections. In 1907, armed with his inheritance and unwavering confidence in his artistic abilities, Hitler moved to Vienna, the glittering capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He applied to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts, fully expecting acceptance. However, his application was rejected in October 1907, with examiners noting that while he showed some technical skill in architectural drawing, his figure work was inadequate. Devastated but determined, he reapplied the following year, only to face rejection again. These failures marked the beginning of Hitler's pattern of blaming external forces rather than accepting personal responsibility. The next few years in Vienna were characterized by poverty, homelessness, and increasing bitterness. He lived in men's hostels, painted postcards for tourists, and gradually descended into the city's underworld of radical politics and anti-Semitic propaganda. Vienna's toxic political atmosphere proved fatally influential. The city was a hotbed of anti-Semitic sentiment, led by figures like Mayor Karl Lueger, whose political success was built on anti-Jewish rhetoric. Hitler absorbed these poisonous ideologies, finding in them convenient explanations for his personal failures and society's problems. He began to view Jews as responsible for everything, from his artistic rejections to the broader social and economic issues he observed. This period of destitution and ideological poisoning in Vienna was crucial in forming Hitler's worldview. Rather than developing empathy through hardship, he became increasingly resentful and hateful, laying the psychological groundwork for the monster he would become. World War I, Finding Purpose in Destruction, 1914 to 1918. The outbreak of World War I in August 1914 provided Hitler with the sense of purpose and belonging that had eluded him throughout his youth. Despite being an Austrian citizen, he enthusiastically enlisted in the Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment, viewing the conflict as a glorious opportunity to serve the German cause he had come to embrace. Hitler served as a dispatch runner, one of the most dangerous roles on the Western Front. This position required carrying messages between command posts and front-line positions, often under heavy enemy fire. Despite the extreme risks, Hitler proved to be a courageous and dedicated soldier, participating in major battles including the First Battle of Ypres, the Battle of the Somme, and Passchendaele. His military service earned him several decorations, including the Iron Cross Second Class in 1914 and the remarkable achievement of the Iron Cross First Class in 1918, an unusual honor for someone of his low rank. Fellow soldiers noted his bravery and reliability, though they also observed his fanatical devotion to the German cause and his lack of interest in normal soldier concerns like leave or relationships. The war years represented the happiest period of Hitler's early life. Military service provided him with structure, purpose, and a sense of belonging to something greater than himself. He embraced the intense nationalism and anti-enemy propaganda of wartime, viewing the conflict as a struggle for German survival and superiority. However, Germany's defeat in November 1918 came as a devastating shock. While recovering from temporary blindness caused by a gas attack, Hitler learned of the armistice and the collapse of the German Empire. Like many Germans, he could not accept that the army had been militarily defeated and instead embraced the stab-in-the-back legend, the false claim that Germany had been betrayed by politicians. Communists and Jews on the home front, the Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, imposed harsh terms on Germany, including massive reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions. These conditions, while severe, provided Hitler and other extremists with powerful propaganda tools and a focus for German resentment. The treaty's terms would become central to Hitler's political rhetoric and his justification for future aggression. The war's end left Hitler feeling personally betrayed and convinced that Germany needed strong leadership to restore its honor and power. This sense of mission, combined with his wartime experience of violence and his pre-existing prejudices, set him on the path toward political extremism and eventual dictatorship. Political Awakening and the Nazi Party, 1919–1924. The chaotic aftermath of World War I created the conditions for Hitler's entry into politics. Assigned to monitor political groups in Munich as part of an army intelligence unit, he attended a meeting of the Small German Workers' Party, DAP, in September 1919. When he passionately argued against a speaker advocating Bavarian separatism, party founder Anton Drexler was impressed and invited him to join. Hitler quickly discovered his extraordinary talent for public speaking. His emotionally charged oratory, combining simple messages with dramatic delivery, resonated powerfully with audiences hungry for explanations and solutions to Germany's problems. He instinctively understood how to tap into popular grievances, offering scapegoats and promising simple solutions to complex issues. By 1921, Hitler had effectively taken control of the party, transforming it according to his vision. The DAP was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP or Nazi Party, a name carefully chosen to appeal to both nationalist and working-class sentiments. Hitler designed the party's symbols, including the distinctive red flag with a white circle and black swastika, understanding the power of visual imagery in politics. The party's 25-point program, drafted in 1920 with Hitler's significant input, combined nationalist, anti-Semitic, and populist elements designed to attract a broad coalition of supporters. Hitler also established the Sturmabteilung, SA, or stormtroopers, a paramilitary wing that provided security at party events and intimidated political opponents through violence and intimidation. Hitler's political message during this period centered on several key themes: denunciation of the Treaty of Versailles, blame of Jews and communists for Germany's problems, promises to restore German greatness, and calls for strong leadership. His speeches grew increasingly popular, drawing larger crowds and media attention. The hyperinflation crisis of 1923, which destroyed middle-class savings and created widespread economic chaos, convinced Hitler that the time was right for revolutionary action. On November 8th, 9th, 1923, he launched the Beer Hall Putsch, attempting to overthrow the Bavarian government and march on Berlin. The coup was poorly planned and quickly suppressed by police, resulting in the deaths of 16 Nazis and Hitler's arrest for treason. However, Hitler's trial in early 1924 became a propaganda triumph. Rather than defending himself, he used the courtroom as a platform to spread his political message, delivering passionate speeches that were widely reported in the national press. The sympathetic judges, sharing his nationalist sentiments, gave him the minimum sentence: 5 years in prison with the possibility of early parole. Mein Kampf, The Blueprint for Genocide, 1924–1925, Hitler's imprisonment in Landsberg. Prison from April to December 1924 proved to be a crucial period for developing his ideology and future strategy. Rather than viewing his incarceration as a setback, he used it as an opportunity to reflect on the putsch's failures and develop a more sophisticated approach to gaining power. During his comfortable imprisonment, he was treated more like a political guest than a criminal. Hitler began dictating his political Manifesto to Rudolf Hess. This work, published as Mein Kampf, My Struggle, in 2 volumes in 1925 and 1926, served as both autobiography and ideological blueprint for the Nazi movement. Mein Kampf revealed the full extent of Hitler's radical worldview. The book articulated a virulent racial ideology that placed Aryans, identified with Germans, at the top of a racial hierarchy and Jews at the bottom. Hitler portrayed history as a struggle between races, with the strongest destined to dominate the weaker ones. This pseudo-scientific racism provided the intellectual foundation for later persecution and genocide. The book's anti-Semitism was not merely prejudice, but a comprehensive conspiracy theory that blamed Jews for virtually every problem facing Germany and the world. Hitler portrayed Jews as a parasitic race that weakened other nations from within, claiming they were responsible for both capitalism and communism, democracy and revolution. This contradictory but emotionally powerful narrative offered simple explanations for complex problems. Hitler also outlined his concept of Lebensraum, living space, arguing that Germany needed to expand eastward into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union to provide territory and resources for its growing population. This expansion would necessarily involve the subjugation or elimination of Slavic peoples, whom he viewed as racially inferior. The book advocated for a totalitarian state led by a single, all-powerful Führer and rejected democracy, liberalism, and communism. Hitler detailed his foreign policy goals, overturning the Treaty of Versailles, rearming Germany, and establishing German hegemony over Europe through conquest and racial purification. While Mein Kampf was often dismissed as the ramblings of a fanatic, it actually served as a remarkably accurate blueprint for Hitler's later actions. The book's pages contained chilling prophecies of the atrocities that would unfold once he achieved power, yet many readers failed to grasp the full implications of its sinister vision. The Road to Power, Exploiting Democracy's Weakness, 1925-1933. Upon his release from prison in December 1924, Hitler faced a challenging political landscape. The Nazi Party was banned in many regions, and Germany was entering a period of relative economic stability known as the Golden Twenties. However, Hitler was determined to rebuild his movement and pursue power through legal means, having learned from the putsch's failure that direct confrontation with the state was futile. Hitler painstakingly reconstructed the Nazi Party as a highly disciplined, centralized political machine. He established regional organizations throughout Germany, created affiliated groups for different demographics, and developed a sophisticated propaganda apparatus. The party remained relatively small during the stable years, typically polling less than 3% in national elections. The turning point came with the Wall Street crash of October 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression. The economic crisis devastated Germany, with unemployment soaring from 1.4 million in 1929 to over 6 million by 1932. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, and widespread poverty returned, creating exactly the conditions of desperation and anger that Hitler needed to exploit. The Nazis masterfully capitalized on this crisis. Hitler promised strong leadership, economic recovery, and national renewal while blaming Jews, communists, and the democratic system for Germany's problems. His message of simple solutions and clear enemies resonated with desperate voters seeking someone to blame for their suffering. The party's electoral breakthrough came in the September 1930 Reichstag elections, when they won 18.3% of the vote, becoming the second largest party. This success was achieved through sophisticated propaganda campaigns, mass rallies featuring Hitler's mesmerizing oratory, and systematic intimidation of opponents by SA stormtroopers. Nazi propaganda, orchestrated by Joseph Goebbels, utilized cutting-edge techniques including radio broadcasts, film, and carefully choreographed mass spectacles. The party's rallies became theatrical events designed to create emotional experiences rather than rational political discourse, with Hitler positioned as Germany's savior. The July 1932 election saw the Nazis become the largest party with 37.3% of the vote, though they still lacked a majority. Despite this success, President Hindenburg initially refused to appoint Hitler as chancellor, viewing him as a dangerous radical. However, a series of political intrigues and miscalculations by conservative politicians ultimately played into Hitler's hands. Conservative leaders like Franz von Papen believed they could control Hitler and use the Nazis' popular support for their own purposes. This proved to be a catastrophic misjudgment. On January 30, 1933, Hindenburg appointed Hitler as chancellor in a coalition government, believing that the conservative politicians in the cabinet could restrain his radical tendencies. This decision marked the beginning of the end for German democracy. The destruction of democracy, 1933-1934. Hitler's appointment as chancellor did not immediately grant him dictatorial power, but he moved with ruthless efficiency to dismantle German democracy from within. Understanding that he needed to eliminate opposition while maintaining a veneer of legality, he systematically destroyed the Weimar Republic's institutions and civil liberties. The Reichstag fire on February 27, 1933, provided Hitler with the perfect pretext for his assault on democracy. When the German parliament building burned down, the Nazis immediately blamed communists and declared it part of a broader conspiracy to overthrow the state. Hitler convinced President Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree the next day, suspending most civil liberties guaranteed by the Constitution, including freedom of speech, assembly, and the press. This emergency decree effectively legalized the creation of a police state. Thousands of communists, socialists, and other opponents were arrested and sent to newly established concentration camps, with Dachau opening in March 1933. The decree remained in effect throughout the Nazi period, providing the legal foundation for systematic persecution and terror. Despite massive propaganda efforts and the suppression of opposition, the Nazis won only 43.9% of the vote in the March 1933 elections. However, by forming a coalition with the conservative German National People's Party and excluding arrested communist deputies, Hitler secured the parliamentary majority needed for his next crucial step. The Enabling Act, passed on March 23, 1933, was the legal death knell of German democracy. This legislation gave Hitler's government the power to pass laws without parliamentary approval for 4 years, effectively transferring legislative authority from the Reichstag to the Chancellor. To ensure its passage, SA and SS troops surrounded the Parliament building, and many opposition deputies were either arrested or intimidated into submission. With dictatorial powers secured, Hitler moved rapidly to eliminate all remaining opposition. Trade unions were abolished and replaced with Nazi-controlled organizations. All political parties except the Nazis were banned or dissolved under pressure. By July 1933, Germany had become a one-party state with Hitler as its undisputed leader. Even within his own movement, Hitler faced potential challenges. The SA, led by Ernst Röhm, had grown into a massive paramilitary force of over 3 million men. Röhm advocated for a second revolution that would redistribute wealth and integrate the SA into the regular army. Hitler viewed this as a threat to his authority and to his relationships with conservative allies and military leaders. The Night of the Long Knives, June 30th, July 2nd, 1934, saw Hitler order the murder of Röhm and hundreds of other SA leaders, along with conservative politicians and personal enemies. This brutal purge eliminated potential rivals, demonstrated Hitler's willingness to use extreme violence against his own supporters, and secured the loyalty of the regular army. When President Hindenburg died on August 2, 1934, Hitler immediately combined the offices of President and Chancellor, declaring himself Führer und Reichskanzler. A subsequent plebiscite, conducted under intense propaganda and intimidation, approved his new powers with 89.9% support. By the end of 1934, Hitler had successfully transformed Germany from a democracy into a totalitarian dictatorship. Nazi Germany, preparing for war and persecution, 1935-1939. With absolute power consolidated, Hitler began implementing the radical agenda outlined in Mein Kampf. The years 1935-1939 saw the systematic preparation for aggressive war, the institutionalization of racial persecution, and the transformation of German society according to Nazi ideology. The Nazi economic program initially appeared successful in addressing Germany's unemployment crisis. Massive public works projects, including Autobahn construction and secret rearmament programs, provided jobs for millions. However, this recovery was built on unsustainable deficit spending and was ultimately designed to prepare Germany for war rather than create lasting prosperity. Propaganda became a pervasive tool of control under Joseph Goebbels. Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. All forms of media, education, and culture were brought under Nazi control. The regime organized massive rallies, particularly the annual Nuremberg Party rallies, which became spectacular displays of Nazi power and unity designed to reinforce Hitler's cult of personality. The persecution of Jews escalated dramatically with the Nuremberg Laws of September 1935. The Reich citizenship law stripped Jews of German citizenship, defining them as subjects rather than citizens. The law for the protection of German blood and German honor prohibited marriages and sexual relations between Jews and non-Jewish Germans. These laws institutionalized racial discrimination and marked a crucial step toward the Holocaust. Hitler's foreign policy during this period systematically challenged the post-World War I international order. In 1935, Germany openly announced its rearmament program, violating the Treaty of Versailles. In 1936, German troops remilitarized the Rhineland, another treaty violation that met with no effective international response. The 1938 Anschluss saw Germany annex Austria, welcomed by many Austrians but achieved through intimidation and the threat of force. Later that year, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. The Munich Agreement of September 1938 saw Britain and France appease Hitler by agreeing to his demands in exchange for promises of peace, promises he had no intention of keeping, the Yas. Escalation of anti-Jewish persecution culminated in Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, on November 9-10, 1938. This state-orchestrated pogrom saw synagogues burned, Jewish businesses destroyed, and thousands of Jewish men arrested and sent to concentration camps. Over 90 Jews were murdered in this coordinated attack, which marked a dramatic escalation toward systematic genocide. By 1939, Hitler had successfully rearmed Germany, eliminated internal opposition, indoctrinated German society with Nazi ideology, and expanded German territory through a combination of diplomacy and intimidation. The international community's failure to respond effectively to these violations encouraged Hitler to pursue even more aggressive expansion, setting the stage for global war. World War II and the Holocaust, Unprecedented Evil, 1939-1945. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, beginning World War II and unleashing the most destructive conflict in human history. Hitler's Blitzkrieg, lightning war tactics, combining tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry, quickly overwhelmed Polish defenses. When Britain and France declared war on September 3rd, Hitler had already committed himself to the path of total war and genocide. The early German victories seemed to vindicate Hitler's aggressive policies. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Netherlands, and France all fell to German forces in rapid succession during 1940. The Battle of Britain, however, marked Hitler's first major strategic defeat, as the Royal Air Force successfully defended British airspace against the Luftwaffe. Hitler's most fateful decision came on June 22, 1941, with the launch of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This massive assault, involving over 3 million Axis troops, was conceived as an ideological war of annihilation aimed at destroying Bolshevism, enslaving Slavic peoples, and acquiring Lebensraum for Germany. The Holocaust, systematic genocide. The invasion of Eastern Europe marked the beginning of the Holocaust, the systematic murder of approximately 6 million Jews and millions of other victims. This genocide was not a spontaneous outburst of violence, but a carefully planned and executed program of extermination that represented the logical conclusion of Nazi racial ideology. The persecution had evolved gradually from social exclusion to systematic murder. Initially, Jews in occupied territories were forced into overcrowded ghettos where they faced starvation, disease, and forced labor. Mobile killing units called Einsatzgruppen followed German armies into Eastern Europe, murdering hundreds of thousands of Jews, Roma, and Soviet officials in mass shootings. The Wannsee Conference of January 20, 1942, coordinated the final solution to the Jewish question, the Nazi plan to murder all European Jews. This meeting of senior Nazi officials demonstrated the bureaucratic, systematic nature of the genocide, involving multiple government departments and agencies in the machinery of death. 6 major extermination camps were established in occupied Poland: Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chełmno, and Majdanek. These facilities were designed specifically for mass murder, equipped with gas chambers capable of killing thousands of people daily. Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest, functioned as both a concentration camp for forced labor and an extermination center. The process was horrifyingly efficient. Jews from across occupied Europe were transported to these camps in cattle cars under appalling conditions. Upon arrival, most were immediately murdered in gas chambers disguised as shower facilities. Their bodies were burned in crematoria or buried in mass graves, while their possessions were sorted and shipped back to Germany. The Holocaust extended beyond Jews to include Roma and Sinti people, hundreds of thousands, murdered, disabled individuals, over 275,000 killed in euthanasia, programs, Soviet prisoners of war. Over 3 million died in German custody, Polish. Intellectuals and clergy Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexual men, political prisoners, and resistance fighters. The scale of this genocide is almost incomprehensible. Entire communities were wiped out, families destroyed, and cultures obliterated. The systematic nature of the killing, involving railways, bureaucracy, technology, and countless individual participants, demonstrated how a modern state could be turned into an instrument of mass murder. The war turns against Germany. By 1942, the tide of war began to turn against Germany. The Battle of Stalingrad, August 1942, February 1943, marked the decisive turning point on the Eastern Front, with the destruction of the German Sixth Army demonstrating that the Wehrmacht could be defeated. The D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, opened a second front in Western Europe, forcing Germany to fight a two-front war it could not win. As Allied forces closed in from both east and west, the Nazi regime continued its genocidal policies with increased desperation. Even as Germany faced certain defeat, resources were diverted to continue the Holocaust, demonstrating that racial ideology, not military necessity, drove Nazi policy. The final collapse and Hitler's end, 1945. By early 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing on all fronts. Soviet forces were advancing toward Berlin from the east, while American, British, and French armies pushed into Germany from the west. German cities lay in ruins from Allied bombing, infrastructure was destroyed, and the population faced severe hardship. Hitler, increasingly isolated and delusional, spent his final months in the Führerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. His physical and mental health had deteriorated dramatically, and he exhibited signs of paranoia, violent rages, and complete detachment from reality. He continued to issue impossible orders to non-existent armies while blaming others for Germany's failures. As Soviet artillery shells began falling on Berlin in April 1945, the situation in the bunker became increasingly desperate. Many Nazi leaders fled, but Hitler remained, determined not to be captured alive. On April 29, 1945, in a bizarre ceremony, he married his longtime companion Eva Braun, who had chosen to join him in the bunker. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet forces only blocks away, Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide in the bunker. Hitler shot himself while Eva took cyanide. Their bodies were carried to the Chancellery Garden, doused with gasoline, and burned according to Hitler's instructions. The man who had promised a 1,000-year Reich died ignominiously in an underground bunker as his capital city burned around him. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, ending the war in Europe. The cost of Hitler's ambitions was staggering. An estimated 85 million people died in World War II, including 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Entire cities were destroyed, millions were displaced, and the trauma of these experiences affected survivors and their descendants for generations. Legacy and lessons. Never again. The aftermath of Hitler's death and Nazi Germany's defeat revealed the full extent of the regime's crimes. As Allied forces liberated concentration camps, the world witnessed the horrific evidence of systematic genocide. The images of emaciated survivors and piles of corpses shocked international opinion and provided undeniable proof of Nazi atrocities. The Nuremberg trials, 1945-1946, established crucial precedents in international law by holding Nazi leaders accountable for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against peace. These trials rejected the defense that perpetrators were only following orders and established the principle that individuals could be held responsible for state-sponsored atrocities. Lessons. For democracy and human rights. Hitler's rise to power demonstrated several critical lessons that remain relevant today. The fragility of democracy. Democratic institutions can be subverted from within by those who exploit legal processes to gain power and then destroy the system that enabled their rise. Constitutional protections mean nothing without citizens willing to defend them. The power of propaganda. Modern media can be weaponized to spread hatred, manipulate public opinion, and create alternative realities that serve authoritarian purposes. Critical thinking and media literacy are essential defenses against such manipulation. The danger of scapegoating. Blaming minority groups for complex social and economic problems creates dangerous divisions that can escalate to persecution and genocide. Societies must resist the temptation to seek simple explanations for complicated challenges. The importance of international cooperation. Appeasement and isolationism in the face of aggression only encourage further violations of international law. Collective security and strong international institutions are necessary to maintain peace. The responsibility of individuals. The Holocaust was carried out not just by Nazi leaders, but by thousands of ordinary citizens who participated, collaborated, or remained silent. Each person has a moral responsibility to resist injustice and protect human dignity. Contemporary relevance. Hitler's story remains tragically relevant in our contemporary world. The warning signs he exploited, economic inequality, social division, political polarization, and the erosion of democratic norms, continue to threaten societies around the globe. Understanding how Hitler manipulated these conditions helps us recognize similar patterns and resist authoritarian movements before they gain power. The Holocaust stands as humanity's starkest warning about the consequences of unchecked hatred and the systematic dehumanization of entire populations. Museums, memorials, and educational programs worldwide work to preserve the memory of victims and ensure that future generations understand both the horror of genocide and their responsibility to prevent its recurrence. Remembering to protect the future Adolf Hitler's story is ultimately a cautionary tale about the choices individuals and societies make when faced with crisis and uncertainty. His rise was not inevitable, but resulted from a series of decisions by millions of people who supported him, collaborated with him, or failed to resist him effectively. The lesson is not that Germans were uniquely evil, but that any society can fall victim to authoritarianism if citizens do not actively defend democratic values and human rights. Hitler's transformation from a failed artist to history's most notorious dictator demonstrates how personal resentment, societal grievances, and dangerous ideologies can combine to produce unimaginable destruction. We study this dark period not to glorify evil, but to understand it, to recognize its warning signs, and to commit ourselves to the values Hitler sought to destroy: human dignity, equality, justice, and peace. The Holocaust memorial phrase, "Never Again," is not merely a slogan, but a call to action, demanding that each generation actively work to prevent such horrors from recurring. In our interconnected world, where information travels instantly and democratic institutions face new challenges, the lessons of Hitler's rise are more relevant than ever. By understanding how democracy can fail and how hatred can triumph, we empower ourselves to make better choices, to stand up for justice, and to build a world where such tragedies become impossible. The ultimate lesson of Hitler's story is that freedom and human dignity are not guaranteed but must be actively protected and defended by each generation. Through vigilance, education, and unwavering commitment to human rights, we can honor the memory of those who perished and ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain.